Hey everyone, geophysicist Stefan Burns here. Breaking news, we have just had a magnitude 6.3 earthquake strike Indonesia, a very deep earthquake at 144.6 kilometers in depth. That's about 100 miles. It's a little bit less than 100 miles. And this was at 2050 Universal Time today, the 23rd of July. We have the new moon coming up in less than 24 hours. It's about 20 hours away as I'm doing this live stream right now. Hello and welcome to everyone who's watching the video. We will do a question and answer after the main report. We have quite a lot happening. I've been having to make a lot of videos as a result. A lot of significant Earth changes unfolding at this moment in time, being driven by a combination of space weather, planetary resonances, and Earth's own internal dynamics. So if you'd like to hear more about that, and even cosmic forces sprinkled in, then make sure you subscribe to the channel. I do live streams almost daily, and just in general post videos almost daily. So make sure to click that notification bell to be notified when there is a live stream, because sometimes we're breaking news with big Earth events. Magnitude 6.3, not the biggest Earth event, but definitely a high magnitude earthquake. Anything above magnitude 6, I consider a higher magnitude earthquake. Of course, the way it scales, going from 6 to 7, 32 times more energy. Anytime you go up in order of magnitude, that's 32 times more energy. So 7 to 8, 32 times more. It gets crazy really quick. But magnitude 6, big earthquake, you don't want to be standing there at the epicenter for a magnitude 6 because that will be pretty frightening. So magnitude 6 just ruptured, and in fact, this is close to the location of the 6.7 that ruptured back on the 14th of July. That started this new wave of global seismic activity, because we've been having elevated seismic activity since this 6.7, and that corresponded with a high-speed stream impact from the sun. So there is a coronal hole currently on the sun pumping out this high-speed stream. It's a very low-density solar wind structure. So the actual number of particles in this solar wind stream can drop down like significantly, 10x, 100x, sometimes even more than that. So when we have these sort of low density structures, what we see just, there's a lot more scientific research and statistical analysis that needs to be done on this. And also just in general, we need a lot more data, just more time. The amount of time that we've been measuring the solar wind is only decades, right? Ideally, we would have thousands of years of data tracking this. But what we see kind of in general is when the solar wind density goes below 1 particle per cubic centimeter, and really when it gets to that 0.1 particle per cubic centimeter or even lower, that's kind of the cutoff threshold for these probes that we have in space for being able to measure that. That's when we see these really big earthquakes, and they become more frequent. So we had a high-speed stream impact, and then we actually had 3 in a row, 1, 2, 3, all from the same coronal hole. We had this magnitude 6.7 there on the 14th, and then we had the 7.3 in Alaska on the 16th, and on the 20th, when this solar wind stream was still very low density, we had the magnitude 7.4 in Kamchatka. Of course, that had a bunch of magnitude 6 aftershocks. So did Alaska. Alaska had a 6.2 aftershock on the 21st. We had a 6.3 aftershock yesterday on the 22nd, Kamchatka. And now this global seismic wave continues with this 6.3 here in Indonesia. So in this video, we're just going to go over all these different factors, and we're going to talk a little bit about Boyle's law, because again, there's a lot more research that needs to be done on this. This is speculative, but it's grounded in some basic physics. And I think sometimes we unnecessarily make things complicated, and we lose track of first principles. And so we're going to touch on first principles as it relates to pressure and volume today, because yes, the Earth is a larger system. It is more complex, has different layers of density, but it should respond similar in some way, subtle or significant, to a change in the pressure around it, which would be the solar wind. That is the environment that surrounds the Earth. And we have data that proves this at least this idea that was collected by Mars just recently by the MAVEN space probe. So let's get into it. Here we have our latest earthquakes. We see that 6.3 showing up on the USGS map again at 144.6 kilometers. That's a deep earthquake. And you can get deep earthquakes in this region. The Ring of Fire sometimes gets really deep earthquakes, but that is like, that's well below the crust. That's starting to be in that asthenosphere region where it's like the boundary between the crust and the mantle. Because you're only getting really thick crust, for example, with like the Himalayas, where it's like 60 miles, maybe even like 70 miles thick, like 50 miles, let's say, or like 100 kilometers. You're going to get that in the interior of a continental plate, especially where you have significant mountain ranges like Everest, or you're also going to get a thick continental crust here, like in the Rocky Mountains, for example, or the Sierra Nevada, going here, separating Nevada and California. But if we go back to our epicenter here, it will notice it's, yeah, there's some continental crust here, of course. This whole area is very interesting because of now how ocean levels have risen. But in general, this is a lot of oceanic crust. And so it's not that thick. So this is way deep, and it's getting closer to the mantle than it is to the crust, you could say. So that is a very deep earthquake. And let's look at our real-time solar wind so we can see this solar wind density change. We also just had a plasma filament blast off. That's headed to hit the Earth. Expected around the 27th, around 8 a.m. Universal Time, according to NOAA. So that is going to give us some sort of solar storm impact. It looks pretty much like a surefire bet to hit us. We'll talk about that too. But here we have our real-time solar wind. This is set for the past day. And we have a few different parameters here. We have our KP index, a measure of geomagnetic volatility, solar wind temperature. This is the velocity there, measuring kilometers per second. This is the density. This is the boundary, the magnetic field orientation, whether it's towards the sun or away from the sun. And then we have our interplanetary magnetic field up top, which is measured in nanotesla. This is just like the total field strength for the black line. So the maximum force vector for the interplanetary magnetic field carried by the solar wind, and then this red line there is the southward component. You need that to go negative, like we see right there, to get good connection to Earth's magnetic field. That has a variety of geophysical effects. We did have a G1 storm. We've been ramping back up a little bit because of this increase in the velocity. You'll notice here that we're hovering now around 700 kilometers per second. We even went up to like 750 and even up to 760 kilometers per second just in the past 12 hours or so. And you'll notice our density here. So we were progressively getting lower, okay? So here we're at 4 particles per cubic centimeter. And as we go along, now we're at like 2.5. And we have a few little dropouts like this. As this high-speed stream really starts to amplify, that density is going to go down. Here's a significant drop right there. Did not last long, but down to like 0.3 particles per cubic centimeter. And then we finally basically broke down below 1, and we stayed there for a little bit. We are just slightly, well, we went slightly above 1, but now we're back down to actually 0.48 right now. So that is fairly low density. And if we go to our 30-day view, we will see this triple high-speed stream pass right there. 1, 2, 3. That really effectively cleared out basically everything in our little part of interplanetary space. So look at the plasma density over this longer time frame. This is going from the 12th of July all the way to its most recent impact, let's say the 21st, okay? So that's like 9 days. Look, we were like 3, and then we just totally bottomed out for a long time, going even down to 0.1, which is the lowest value that this can register. And look right here, that's when it really dropped out. And keep in mind that the Alaska earthquake happened on the 16th, and then that was a 7.3, and then the Kamchatka earthquake 7.4 occurred on the 20th. So right in that low density stream is when we had the biggest earthquakes in a long time, back to back with multiple aftershocks. So there's definitely something to this, and I think that something is effectively explained by Boyle's law. But now we are back in this high-speed stream. Solar wind density is going down again. I think it's going to continue to trend lower, but this was a very large coronal hole that was on the sun. This one is not as large. Let us look actually at the sun so we can see this hole on the sun. It's not a hole through the sun, but it is a hole in the solar corona, which is the atmosphere of the sun. And we see this large dark spot. Solar wind, or the plasma density is low, the plasma temperature is low, so it shows up dark in this 211 angstrom view. And it's cutting through the equator. So that means that that solar wind is sweeping out along the ecliptic plane, which it did, and it hit us with first its high density region, because the fast solar wind builds up and builds up, constantly running into slower plasma and causing this shock region. But then once you get through that shock, all of a sudden you enter into more of a vacuum. So that's now rotating beyond geoeffective, though we are still in this high-speed stream and that low-density solar wind. And also, while we're here at the SDO website, we also just had today a plasma filament launch. So we can look at that, and it's the most significant thing that's happened on the sun in the past few days as it relates to, an ejection of plasma. So this is going back, I think, to the 21st, and then today around 3 or 4, we'll see a plasma filament launch right there. There it goes, just like that. And that is headed out our way. If I put on a video here, it shows it even better. We can watch how it starts vertical. So it's kind of like this, but then it actually kind of goes horizontal. So watch this really closely. It's kind of difficult to see, but see how it starts off and then it like goes horizontal? That's basically blasting out exactly along the ecliptic plane in between, that's the plane that's created by the position of the sun and the earth. And so that is going to hit us. Question is, how significant is that impact going to be? That's expected to come in around the 27th, according to NOAA. We can look at their space weather model, but before that, we will look at the coronagraph view because we have a nice halo from this plasma filament, which is indicative that it's going to hit us directly. So let us check that out. Here is our coronagraph view for this plasma filament launch. It's really just for the past 24 hours, in fact. So here we go. And we'll notice this nice halo signature from this. So watch how this pushes out right about there. And there's that halo signature from that plasma filament. So we'll watch it a couple times, but we see this nice push right there going out in all directions. And that is not the fastest plasma filament launch, but eventually it will reach us. So we have a very interesting energy progression here where we're in this high-speed stream. We've been having high magnitude earthquakes across the globe, just in general increasing energy volatility. We've had some G1 geomagnetic storming. We just had this magnitude 6.3. We have the new moon coming up in less than 24 hours. That's opposite Pluto behind the Earth. That's also creating some interesting energy tension, you could say. And then we have the day out of time on the 25th, according to the Mayan calendar. And then we now have this solar storm impact come in, and sunspots are increasing on the sun at this moment in time. Some are actually getting kind of large. So that's a new development as well. Let's look at our solar wind prediction though, according to NOAA, because they have this plasma filament already modeled. And so we'll see it launch out fairly soon. And there it goes, fairly slow. We notice that's not the highest velocity. This is our velocity, there's a scale. This is density, but we do see that coming out right nicely. This is the top-down view right here. So basically right to the Earth, and then this is south and north. So this is like the vertical view. And we see it's also going just like this, exactly along that ecliptic plane. So here's the bump in plasma density that we get right there. And we see that's coming in right around 8 a.m. Universal Time, according to them. Keep in mind, this is a model. It's not going to be accurate. They may get really close. Sometimes they get really close. Sometimes they're off by like 24 hours. It's a little bit of a crapshoot. Space weather prediction is pretty difficult. So props to everyone that does this officially or just kind of like I do, just for the public benefit. because this is very difficult stuff. We have very limited data that comes in to work off of these predictions. I think this will give us a G1 impact. It could perhaps be a little bit more, but it wasn't the strongest halo signature. Yeah, I think G1, G2 is the most that we can expect. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if it like jumps up to G2 a little bit, but something like G3, that would be surprising to me. But who knows? It's coming right after this new moon Pluto opposition. So, but I'd say probably G1 is what you should expect. But going back, and before we move on, just quickly want to show you, here is the geomagnetic volatility that we've been having over the past 24 hours or so. You notice that things got really calm and quiet, and then we bumped up to this G1 level. We've been in this zone kind of bouncing around a little bit. So some periods of G1 storming, mostly just below G1 storming in that active zone. Now, you may be asking, okay, well, you talked about the solar wind and how that is influencing earthquakes, and maybe this global seismic wave is going to spread around even further, right? Where is that going to go if that's the case? If the Earth is expanding because the solar wind density has dropped, there's more of a vacuum, then what's the dynamics of that? Well, a couple things. It's probably a subtle effect. I don't think this is a significant effect in terms of like, oh, we've expanded out 100 kilometers or anything. It's probably a very subtle effect. It's mostly going to do with the atmosphere, because you're going to have the atmosphere respond much more readily to this than the solid Earth may. But when you have this change in atmospheric pressure, then that is going to change the pressure on top of faults. And also water also reacts to this. So you have gases, liquids, and solids, and they're going to react differently to changes in pressure. Gases will be the most reactive to a change in pressure. Liquids will eventually respond. We're going to watch an interesting video on this. And then solids will respond the least, but they technically are going to respond to a change like this. But they have a nice, strong crystalline structure, and so that's going to be by far the most subtle and reduced effect. But that doesn't mean just because it's limited to, let's say, the atmosphere primarily, that can't affect the Earth, because we know that atmospheric disturbances and crustal disturbances, aka an earthquake, are really intimately linked together. So if you have changes to the atmosphere, you can see changes to the Earth. And if we just bring in the astrology for a second, I just find it really interesting that we had Sedna move into Gemini after spending 60 years in Taurus, which is fixed Earth. We just had Uranus move into Gemini after spending 7 years in Taurus, fixed Earth. They are now reaching their 1-degree orb at the very beginning of Gemini, which is mutable air. And both of them, according to astrology, would be saturated with Earth energy. And so they're crossing from Earth into air, and we're seeing in real life play out how changes to the atmosphere perhaps are triggering significant seismic events on Earth. So very, very interesting stuff. That's why I study into it. You take it with a slight grain of salt, but it is very, very interesting. So let us check out this, this video that was put out by NASA. And this is on, this is about Mars. They have a probe that orbits around Mars called MAVEN, and what happened was MAVEN detected a 100x decrease in the solar wind back in December of 2022. And so they show the induced magnetosphere around Mars, because you have the solar wind energizing the ionosphere and just in general the atmosphere of Mars, which is very, very low density already. But what happened is this anomalous decrease in the solar wind occurred, and MAVEN is out there orbiting around collecting these measurements. It picked up the density change, and then as a result, it also noticed how this induced magnetosphere and the atmosphere of Mars expanded outwards. So it actually expanded outwards significantly. And there's a data article that I have on this, which I can show you. I can link this in the video description once the video is over. But they talk about this. So that's the thing. A lot of this data that or at least things that I talk about, which some people push back against. For example, space weather and earthquakes and that connection. Or maybe this, for example. A lot of people say, oh, well, there's no research for us, whatever. Or, hey, USGS says that doesn't exist, or NASA says that doesn't exist. And yeah, maybe that's their official stance. And you wonder how many people are guiding that policy decision. And you also recognize that most science is kind of reactionary in many ways in terms of mainstream acceptance. It takes like often decades for it to all of a sudden become accepted pretty quickly once the evidence is undeniable. And also nowadays you just can't trust government institutions one lick. Though I think the science-based institutions are more trustworthy in general, but there's agendas everywhere nowadays, unfortunately. So that's just like a quick realistic aside. But the thing is if you have an open mind, open, curious mind, and you study into this stuff, you will find plenty of data and articles and evidence from these government institutions which support some of these ideas that others think are totally nonsensical, you could say, which I think is an unfair shake. Most of the people saying that simply have even like read some of the papers on this stuff, which is your first clue. But basically, NASA's MAVEN observes the disappearing solar wind. This has happened on Earth many times before. A good example is we had a huge decrease in solar wind density when the 9.1 earthquake popped off in Japan. That was March 11, 2011. That was a coronal hole high-speed stream impact, dropped the solar wind density, boom, magnitude 9.1, huge tsunami, Fukushima meltdown. See, these things happen. We see that time and time again, actually. If you look at the record of data that we do have for the most powerful earthquakes, there's coronal holes on the Earth-facing side of the sun, central or geoeffective every single time. This is like magnitude 8.5 plus. It's pretty interesting. So they saw this drop in the solar wind data, and it was unbelievable. Then basically, here's the key paragraph here. Mars, like all planets in our solar system, is constantly immersed in the solar wind. The solar wind exerts pressure on the Martian atmosphere and ionosphere and drives much of the escape of the atmosphere. Well, if it happens on Mars, it happens on Earth too. And Earth has a much denser atmosphere, so it's going to want to expand out even further as a result, because Mars's atmosphere is already very low density. So the osmotic gradient between the solar wind density dropping and the Martian atmospheric density is already pretty low. So for Earth, you can imagine this effect is going to be amplified because we have a high density atmosphere. At least closer to the surface, it does decrease as you get further out. The solar event in December 2022 was caused by a faster moving solar wind that overtook slower moving solar wind, which acted like a broom, sweeping and compressing the two regions together. This interaction, called a stream interaction region, left behind a rare void of extremely low density solar wind in its wake, which was observed by MAVEN. And the disappearance of the solar wind led to some incredible interactions with Mars' magnetosphere and ionosphere. Again, it's an induced magnetic field. Mars only has some regional crustal magnetic anomalies. It doesn't have a internally generated magnetic field anymore, as far as we know. As the density of the solar wind dropped by a factor of 100. So for example, that could be going from 10 particles per cubic centimeter down to 0.1, which are values that we've had just in the past 30 days here in our Earth orbit area. So we've been having these conditions. It caused the pressure to decrease, and the magnetosphere and the ionosphere of the planet were able to expand by thousands of kilometers. This is what MAVEN detected. The Martian ionosphere, the Martian ionosphere and atmosphere, the Martian atmosphere, ionosphere, and magnetosphere expanded by thousands of kilometers, more than triple the typical size, and everything dramatically changed in character. So Mars is different than Earth, but we see this Boyle's law in effect at Mars, at least with this case study. So that right from NASA, folks. Like they may not necessarily be pumping out a ton of research talking about this, but and saying, hey, this is the case, because there seems to be some reluctance to connect earthquakes to space weather. but you just look a little bit deeper and you get quite a bit of evidence for interesting things. Now, this isn't specifically talking about earthquakes. We're just talking about how it's changing, it's causing the atmosphere to expand, at least on Mars, okay? And water is quite a bit different than a marshmallow or a balloon, right? I'm sure you've seen before someone puts a balloon in a vacuum chamber and you see the balloon expand, right? Because you have the air no longer exerting pressure on the balloon. So the air trapped within the balloon is able to expand it out further. You can even pop the balloon that way if you have a big enough chamber. Look what happens with the water. You reduce that pressure enough, the water starts to boil, right? It's actually now, the conditions are such that the water can actually, some of it boil off because it's energizing. And it's expanding into that vacuum as water vapor. Boyle's law in action, we get things that can expand to expand under a vacuum. And so it makes sense that that's what's happening with the Earth at this moment in time. And it's a pretty simple to visualize explanation as to how a stream, a low density stream of solar wind, very low density stream of solar wind can perhaps trigger these earthquakes to occur more frequently at a higher magnitude and just in general more frequently across the globe, which is what we're seeing. If you scroll down just a little bit, we see our global seismic activity level for the past 90 days. This is the earthevolution.com energy-analytics portal where I have a variety of data feeds for you. And so we see this 7.4 that hit Drake's Passage. This is south of South America, May 2nd. And then we just had some magnitude 6s along with a lot of days where we didn't even have magnitude 6 earthquakes. The influence of these coronal hole ice-free streams was kind of lessening. The impacts weren't that good. But then we seemed to kind of get those impacts to ramp back up again because they started being trans-equatorial once more. Right? A lot of them were like not crossing that solar equator. You need to cross that solar equator for that high-speed stream to really hit the Earth strongly and not go to the south or to the north. So when I started putting out that earthquake watch, because we saw the trans-equatorial components to those coronal holes and knew that we had some high-speed streams coming in, look at what happened with the earthquakes, okay? That's at 6.7 Banda Sea, that's the 7.3 Alaska, 7.4 Kamchatka, and our latest 6.3 right there in the Molucca Sea. So that's just nearby that Banda Sea. And so we've been having these increases in earthquake activity. I think that's likely to continue as this coronal hole high-speed stream continues to influence the Earth. And then if we continue on, we do have other factors at play. For example, sunspot numbers are now going up. So the sunspots right now, and we see this one's fairly large, but it's separating out. I wouldn't expect this to do anything terribly big over the next few days. But this one right there has grown quite a bit just in the past 24 hours. And you will also notice that with this sunspot group right there, that it is fairly low down in the southern hemisphere for the sun. So typically with solar maximum, you get these zones of magnetic flux to get closer and closer to the equator. Then eventually you have a termination event, and that's kind of the signal that solar max is over and that you're actually like at the end of the descending phase and you're near solar minimum. This one growing so much, so far down the south, shows that there is still some magnetic field instability closer to the polar regions where you want that magnetic field to stabilize as the new polarity, indicating that, hey, we're still in solar maximum. So it's just a one-off, but that is quite low down, and it has been growing pretty rapidly. And we see the magnetic field for that there. This is definitely the strongest magnetic field and magnetic vortices on the Earth-facing side of the sun right now. They will be Earth-centered direct during that new moon. So there's potential and possibility, but in general, going into the rest of July and into August, we're going to have a lot more sunspots. As you can see, a lot of them coming in. These are all going to be in this zone in about a week. And so I think August is going to be a very active month as it relates to solar flares. And if we touch astrology again, the sun is going to be in its home temple of Leo and domicile for the first 2/3 of August. So it makes perfect sense to me that we're going to see the sun give us a bit of a show when it's back home and comfortable in its home sign. So whether you believe that stuff or not, it's up to you. But the more I research into it and study it, the more it keeps proving itself, which is why I talk about that on the channel. So if you have a question, please ask it in the comments below. I'll answer 3 questions, and then anyone that also attaches a question to a super thanks will get their question answered. I'll finish with those questions if any come in, but I'll answer 3 free questions to start to give everyone a chance, and then I'll answer some of the questions attached to super thanks, and that can be any amount. So yeah, a lot of activity. We have the magnitude 6.3. The space weather is increasingly intense. We've had the high-speed stream impacts, that we haven't been having big solar flares, but now we have this plasma filament coming in. That's going to give us a bit of a rattle. We just had a bit of a rattle with the G1 storm. So yeah, there's a variety of things you can do if you've been feeling this. In terms of your health and wellness, maybe your energy levels, earthing and grounding is very, very important for that. Just in general, I have some stuff that supports you with this. Health and wellness is just as important to me as science and all this other stuff. So if you want to check out the earthing shoe products that I have, that's on wildfreeorganic.com. These are the best earthing shoes you can buy because they were designed by me, a geophysicist with an interest in this and also a desire to actually stick to physics to keep these earthing shoes actually usable and like conductive, so you actually get that connection to the ground. Barefoot's always best, but sometimes it's not. If you're out gardening and you use a shovel, things like that nature, the earthing boots are fantastic for that. Then I also have a variety of all organic herbal tea blends and coffee on my website, www.earthevolution.com/store. I have 2 websites right now. And for example, right now I'm drinking the spirituality, some iced spirituality, which is fantastic. Excellent to have on hand when we have these sort of space weather impacts, because that increase in volatility, A, seems to potentiate dreams to a greater degree, and spirituality is a dream tea blend. And then also B, it seems to increase the sympathetic nervous system. So something like spirituality or tranquility on the site helps to calm down the autonomic nervous system, put you in a parasympathetic mode. So all these things are super important. I offer them because they help. And that's like the primary, first and foremost thing. I also do all this stuff to, help support myself, because a man, woman, everyone deserves to have a roof over their heads and, the ability to feed themselves. But that's not by any means the principal aim. The principal aim is to help others, provide a lot of information out there for free, education, just understand what's happening on this planet. So I think we have some questions coming in. And the first one is from Logatha, or just Loga, asking, does this pull our Earth more out at the equator? That's an interesting question. We do have an equatorial bulge. And so I don't know. I mean, this effect that I'm describing, I'm not sure it's really been quantified. I think this is something that probably isn't really shown in the literature yet. Doesn't mean that's not the case, right? If you consider all of reality, just what reality actually is, our research papers don't even get 0.000000001% of that quantified. So just because something's in the literature doesn't mean it's not in the literature, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But in terms of understanding the specific nuances of this, I can only go by intuition at this point. So does it pull at the equator more? I don't know, but it's a good question. And I'd recommend that you research into this more yourself and check it out. Dajamel asking, is there any risk for the Cascadia subduction zone or Mount Rainier, Yellowstone volcano, axial submarine volcano, or a major tsunami? Yeah, so let's just start with the last one, which is axial submarine volcano. This is not a volcano to be worried about. Doesn't mean that's not interesting if it does erupt in 2025, which, a lot of people are expecting that it may do that because it's been showing signs of increasing activity. But it's not a undersea volcano that we have any indication of being cataclysmic or something. Doesn't mean that perhaps that changes, but it's fed by a hotspot, which in general has a more mafic magma, and it just extrudes out rather than kind of building up this explosive pressure. So anyone that's trying to freak you out about axial seamount, is doing you a disservice, because it's going to be interesting energetically. There's also, the fact that Earth is deciding to release energy through there, but like in terms of some sort of like apocalyptic event or something, that's almost certainly not going to occur from axial seamount. Doesn't mean it's not interesting though, that eruption, if and when that occurs. Yellowstone volcano is another thing. I talked about that in yesterday's live stream. I couldn't find any evidence of stuff that people were talking about, saying the seismograph stations are down. They took them all offline. We checked out the seismograph stations. We looked at 3 of them, live data feeds. 1 of them was offline. The other 2 were good. If you monitor a network of 70 or 100 seismographs, and some of them in the remote wilderness, some of them are going to go offline before you can get some USGS volunteer or maybe the university geologist to go out there and fix it. And it costs money. And there's been all these cuts to the government. So you have to think about these things too. So Mount Rainier has had a significant earthquake swarm, probably 900 plus earthquakes at this point. Last I reported on was 800 plus, probably 850, 900 plus now. But there hasn't been any other signs of unrest at Mount Rainier in terms of like domes or building out or bulges or changes in gas emissions and stuff. So. And then the Cascadia subduction zone, it's locked and loaded, but is it going to rupture? That's a big question. So there's a lot of these things that people discuss about, and you can put me in this camp, but I don't unnecessarily freak people out when there's no evidence to do so, which is what a lot of people, they don't have the morals to stop them from doing that. That's the thing. So will these things go at some point? Yeah, I'm sure at some point Mount Rainier will explode again. Cascadia subduction zone will rupture. The axial seamount will erupt, though it's probably not going to be anything that actually concerns us on the coast, let's say Oregon, Washington. And Yellowstone will erupt at some point, and that will probably be a pretty big event. But when, how much, like what, all those things, we just don't know. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. And we'll do one more question before we get to the super thanks. So if you want to make sure your question gets answered, make sure to drop it as part of a super thanks. And just a nice comment from Martha saying, thank you so much for the important information that you bring to us. Well, thank you so much, Martha. And yeah, happy to have this responsibility. And, I really just enjoy it. But when things are happening, I am also reporting on it as soon as I can for all of you, because I know that that's important for a lot of you. And I'm not knocking anyone here, but sometimes there'll be like a significant event, and it'll be like 12 hours, even like 2 days before you get some of the other large channels to even like acknowledge it. And this is sometimes just way too late for people that, let's say, feel these things energetically. So that's why I'm on top of it as fast as I can for you guys, so long as I'm also honoring my own health and wellness and my energy levels too. And Rapture Ready, no surprise, is saying Yellowstone is on the brink, it's about to burst. So maybe. But I am not seeing anything unusual at Yellowstone according to my analysis. And I have been checking it, just FYI. So here's a question from Flor de Lisa Azul asking, has the seismic activity in Japan decreased a bit? Do you think there's still a risk of an unprecedented earthquake event? Yeah, it has gone down in terms of that seismic swarm. But there's always going to be rhythms and activity, but that seismic swarm in the Ryukyu Trench has subsided a little bit over the past couple of days. But the risk of a very large earthquake, or even like what I call a Godzilla event, which would be, a big seismic volcanic tsunami event, even pyroclastic event perhaps, just a massive volcanic explosion effectively. The risk of that, I'd say, is the same. So I don't know. I mean, this is all... A lot of eyes are on Japan because of this manga prophecy. And Ryo Tsuzuki has gotten a lot of things right before. Most notably that magnitude 9.1 to the day. And she saw this in a dream, the earthquake, the tsunami, everything. So it makes you think. Now, is that going to happen in July, which is a prediction that something even bigger will happen in July to Japan? I don't know. Are all the conditions there to make it happen? Yeah. That's the thing. It's not like these conditions are always active with the solar wind, with the the new moon being there, or full moon, that increased tidal forcing the day at a time, some of the other planetary resonances. Everything is there to basically the potential is there, you could say, based on all these factors. But will it occur? I don't know. We hope it doesn't. We hope it doesn't. We'll be doing a cosmic connection meditation on the day at a time, July 25th. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. We'll do a live stream. Click those notifications to be aware of that. And then Grush Deva is asking, do you support James Maxwell's growing Earth model? Yeah, I've started to research into it a little bit. And so I'm not immediately dismissive of it, but I'm not the biggest expert on that specific model. Here, I'm just simply talking about the subtle expansion of, like, for example, the ionosphere, the magnetic field, and maybe the atmosphere as well as a result of this super low density solar wind, and how that may affect the stress loading dynamics in the crust and therefore influence earthquake activity. But in terms of like the expanding Earth hypothesis, that's still something I need to research into more, and I'll do so with time. And then Margarita Diaz with a very nice super thanks. Thank you so much. Thanks for your fantastic work. 400K soon. Yeah, the channel's on a tear right now, so thank you all so much for the support, doing what I can to be here for you, and you guys have all been there for me as well. Thank you, Kay, for the super thanks. Tony D for the super sticker. One Match Can Light 1000 for the super sticker. And also Anna Zarvazina for the super sticker. Thank you so much. Gemma, I'm sorry. Gemma for the super sticker. And also another one from One Match Can Light 1000. Have you checked out the SRGOPOC model yet? I don't know what you're referencing. Yeah, that's a lot of abbreviations. I'm not exactly sure what model you're referencing, but maybe once the live stream's over, drop that in the chat, like the comments, and I'll check it out. We have another one here from Green Bean. I'm 175 miles south from Mount Shasta, 20 miles from the ocean. Do you think I'm all right? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you're going to be all right. It depends on Shasta, really. If you're 20 miles from the ocean, you don't have to worry about tsunami or anything. Like some of these ideas of, for example, and I haven't really read into him too much, so I can't knock the guy completely. But Edgar Cayce, a lot of people love him. Prophet from like 100 years ago. He had all these visions. His map of how North America looks after like this huge apocalyptic flood is not based off of the actual topography of North America. If you were to take the ocean levels and rise them up, it looks totally different than his map that he made of how North America looks flooded and things of that nature. So that's kind of a ding against some of these predictions by Edgar Cayce. So you have to look at these things carefully. So if you're referencing the fact like that, being 20 miles from the ocean, but being worried about sea level rise, in your lifetime, I don't think you have anything to worry about. The biggest thing that you have to think about is Shasta, and really you probably don't have to, the risk of Shasta exploding in your lifetime is probably quite low. But it's possible. It's possible. If you start to see increased seismicity there and gas emissions and more, like, maybe it's time to book it over to the East Coast, or even better yet, go to Europe or Hawaii or something until maybe something happens. Be prepared, not scared. Margarita Diaz, boom shakalaka. We are in this together. And Maureen is very nice with their super thanks. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights and keeping us so well informed. Absolutely, you're welcome. And Grushdeva is saying, look at the geological map of the world and the NOAA ocean floor age map, and you'll see it in a few seconds. I think you were the one that asked earlier. No. You're seeing James Maxwell's growing Earth model. All right, I will check that out. And thank you to everyone who took part in today's live stream, the question and answer, and just the official report. I've been your host, Stefan Burns. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like the video, smash that like button. It helps the channel grow. We're on the road to 400K, actually 500K. We're going to hit 400K super, super quick. So yeah, thank you for all the continued support, and welcome to everyone that's new. We have a very open, welcoming community here. I just ask everyone to be respectful of others. That's really the only thing that causes people to end up on the naughty list, you could say. So as long as you're respectful of others, you don't lose your cool, then everything is great. We're looking to build a more harmonious, peaceful Earth existence. We don't need more conflict and aggression. At least I don't think we do. So If you'd like to stay up to date on all these things that are occurring, geologic, geophysical, solar, space weather, cosmic, spiritual, and more, then please subscribe. And I'm wishing all of you well. Please check out the grounding products at wildfreeorganic.com/store and the all organic herbal tea and coffee products at earthevolution.com/store. I make these to help support you along your health, your wellness, and your spiritual journey. So I hope that you receive those, and make sure you have some spirituality on hand for moments like this where it behooves you to expand outwards yourself with your psyche and with your spirit to pull in some of these more etheric and cosmic energies. So thank you all so much, wishing all of you well, and I'll see you all in the next video.